Today's LaserDisc is the 1992 Wesley Snipes action picture that was one of the films that launched the action career of Wesley Snipes and made him an action movie icon of the 90s, sort of the next generation of action movie icons after the 80s crew was starting to fizzle out and he was the next kind of up-and-comer. And this is Passenger 57, a movie that did incredibly well at the box office, but was pretty much critically panned. I think it was a little bit on the lower end of mixed reception. It wasn't considered horrible, but definitely on the lower end as far as reviews. Does it deserve that? Yes and no. It's a very, very enjoyable movie, but at the same time, it is so incredibly just by the numbers action movie. It really could have. It's one of those movies where you could see almost any action star of the day in that role, and that's not always a good thing, and I'll explain a little bit about that later. But Passenger 57, Wesley Snipes plays an ex-Secret Service man who's now working after he had a horrible incident where his wife died during a robbery at a convenience store, and he's haunted by that memory. He now works teaching airline security classes, and eventually an old friend and work buddy convinces him to take on a new position, get out of that life, out of that sort of the dull existence versus, you know, the man of action that he really is, and take up a new job as the head of security for an airline. And while he's on the way to start that new job, he ends up on a flight with a bunch of terrorists who take over a plane. There's a wanted criminal who's finally captured, and the FBI, without proper notice, brings him onto the plane. He ends up escaping because he has a bunch of accomplices on that aircraft working with him. And another side character is a student who was a bit of a problem student for Wesley Snipes in one of his classes. One of the opening sequences happens to be a stewardess on the plane, and she ends up being an interesting kind of sidekick character on the plane, and is done well in her own right. I think she works fairly well, because she's more than just a prop, more than just a pretty face, which can happen sometimes in these very by-the-numbers action movies with a side female character. She's not sort of a femme fatale or something along those lines. She is just kind of the girlfriend sometimes, and I think she actually worked a little bit better in this. Again, nothing spectacular, but a little bit better than, say, I just did a Laser Talk, if you go ahead and watch that one, for Spawn. And in that movie, one of the big problems that I have with it that I don't think I reiterated enough in my review is that his wife is not a character at all. She is literally just a bargaining chip. You know, it's like who gets this girl, who gets to, you know, sleep with this girl is kind of a bargaining chip. And in this movie, there's the role, while not fantastic, is at least a little more respectful and a little more an actual character. But again, majority of the characters, aside from the main villain and Snipes himself, really aren't that fleshed out to begin with. So in a movie like this, she is one of the better characters. It's a very by-the-numbers action movie for the time, and it's one where my wife was actually talking about it, watching a good deal of this with me, and saying how this is the kind of action movie that is so standard and doesn't really do anything exceptional that you could see different action stars in that exact same role, and it's kind of fun actually to think about how that would change that role, how having, you know, Jean-Claude Van Damme could really have played this role too, and it would have been a little bit cheesier, a little bit more martial arts heavy. You could have had, you know, Stallone in this role, and it probably would have been a little more of a serious picture. You could have, I mean, the obvious thing is you could have Harrison Ford there, and it's kind of like Air Force One, but worse. You could have Arnold in there, and it probably would have been a little bit more over the top of the action and a little bit more comedic. And it's just one of those things where it's not a bad movie by any means, but it's very cut and paste basic action movie to where you could see different people playing different roles, and even like with the main villain, you could see, you know, Gary Oldman or someone in there. It could have worked with different people, and that's the sign of a weak script when you have someone who does a fairly good performance, and Wesley Snipes actually is pretty good in this as far as the action. You believe his character, he gives a good performance, he has a lot of great comedic moments and sort of one-liners. One that became famous was Always Bet on Black, so he actually does a good job of the role that he's given. But the actual structure of the writing, when you have a character who's not so, when you have an actor who's not so definitively that character to the point where you can't picture anyone else playing that role, if you don't have that, if you can really in your mind actor swap and it would just play out differently, but not, you know, worse in any way, then there's an issue with writing where it just doesn't come quite together. And you also get a fun early role of Elizabeth Hurley, which I was not expecting, didn't realize she was in this movie. That's pretty much, you know, the summary here as far as my opinion of this movie. I really enjoyed it. It was actually a lot of fun. It's a movie I would watch again. but it's not a particularly outstanding movie by any means. So I really do think that it deserves what it got. It deserves its mixed critical reception on the negative end, because it really isn't that great. It really isn't anything spectacular. But I also think it deserves its box office success of the time, and deserves to be one of the early vehicles of making Wesley Snipes a big 90s action star, because it works in that regard. It is just sort of a fun action movie, that you go and watch in the summer. And that to me is not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes you just kind of want just a fun action movie, and this isn't one of the action movie greats, not one of the absolute classics, but it's still very, very enjoyable. I liked it, and as I said, I'd watch it again. So if you have not seen this before, definitely pick it up. And this is a good LaserDisc release. There are no special features or anything like that, but it looks and sounds absolutely fantastic. I don't remember what the print date was on here. Probably not that long after the movie came out in '92. But it is in, it is a letterbox, widescreen format, nice release. So a fun but fairly by the numbers action movie to pick up.